Hey there, it is Saturday, so it's movie night, and I'm here to present another quarantine quadruple feature for your viewing pleasure. My name is Paul. This is my video for week 40. Now, Christmas is right around the corner, less than a week away, and you know what that means? It means it's time for every unoriginal cinephile in your life to start claiming that Die Hard is the best Christmas movie of all time, as if that's not a hot take that we've been digesting around this time every year for the past decade. So don't worry, I'm not going to talk about Die Hard. I do think it's a brilliant film, great action movie, and yes, it's a Christmas film, but we've all been talked to death about Die Hard, and I think there's some more original choices that we can talk about this week. If you're anything like me, which you're probably not, you don't really like Christmas movies that much. I'm not particularly fond of most Christmas films. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life is a classic and a brilliant film. My favorite Christmas movie of all time is Bob Clark's Black Christmas from 1974, one of the great horror slasher films that's ever been made. But I want to choose some movies tonight that might speak to a wider range of audiences, for those more discerning film viewers that want something a little more off the beaten path as far as Christmas fare goes. So I've chosen out 4 of my favorite Christmas films that aren't your typical Christmas movies. So today we're going to be looking at a quadruple feature of alternative Christmas films. And we're going to start right off the bat with one of my favorite movies of all time. I watch this every year or two around this season. The argument for it being a Christmas film might be a little shaky, but the whole thing takes place over a few days right before Christmas. Starts out at a Christmas party. It ends with a couple people Christmas shopping, and all throughout the middle of the film, we're constantly exposed to Christmas trees, decorations, carols, things like that. So it's definitely got the Christmas spirit, even though it is a bit of a darker film. Our first movie is my favorite Christmas film after Black Christmas, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Eyes Wide Shut is one of those very enigmatic and haunting films that just stick with you. I remember the first time I saw Eyes Wide Shut, I was 15 years old. I had to buy a ticket for something else and sneak into the theater, and I was really excited because this was the first time that I was ever able to see a Stanley Kubrick movie in a movie theater. So me and a couple of my friends snuck in. I didn't really know what to expect, but the movie I got was not what I was expecting. I was expecting to be a little faster and more flashy, like some of Kubrick's films before Eyes Wide Shut. His film right before that, like 13 years prior, was Full Metal Jacket, which is a pretty fast-paced, exciting film, especially for like a teenager. A Clockwork Orange was one of my favorites at the time. Again, another very fast-paced, entertaining, flashy movie. So I wasn't expecting the very deliberate pacing of Eyes Wide Shut. And while I might not have appreciated it at the time as much as I've come to, there was definitely something about it that kept me riveted. I was fascinated by what I was watching. I was enthralled. I was creeped out. I just thought it was a really interesting movie. In fact, I saw it with 2 friends, and when we walked out of the theater, 2 of them were like, "Oh, what'd you think?" And then, both of them were basically like, "Yeah, I thought it was okay. I didn't really like it that much. What'd you think, Paul?" And I was like, I can't explain why, but I think it was maybe a brilliant film. And I've certainly come to think that over the years, revisiting this time and time again. It is one of Kubrick's best films. The more I watch it, the higher it climbs on my ranking of Kubrick's films. And I do think he's the greatest filmmaker of all time. So one of the best of his is certainly, in my opinion, a very good film. So it stars Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman right before their marriage ended. So it was the biggest couple in Hollywood, starring in Stanley Kubrick's first film in over a decade. So the movie was big news when it was being filmed, right? And then it took a really, really long time for them to make the movie. In fact, Eyes Wide Shut holds the Guinness Book of World's Record for longest consecutive shooting days for one production. They filmed 400 days in a row without having a day off. because, you know, Stanley Kubrick is meticulous and he films scenes over and over and over again. And I don't think Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman knew what they were getting into when they agreed to do a movie with Kubrick, but I'm very glad both of them did, because I think both of them turn out some of the best work of their lives in this movie. If you don't know, Eyes Wide Shut is about a married couple that goes to a Christmas party. They're very upper class, wealthy, elite couple. Tom Cruise is a doctor. They go to a party and she sees her husband, what she interprets as flirting with a couple girls. And then he disappears from the party for a while to go help the host with a medical emergency. She doesn't know why he's disappeared for a while. So when they get home, she kind of asks him, "Did you sneak away and hook up with those two girls?" And he's like, "No, of course not. I was helping out Sidney Pollack with this issue that was going on." And she was like, "Well, did you want to?" And they kind of start getting into this discussion about sexual desire. And they start smoking some weed and they start letting their guards down. And they get into a bit of a heated discussion about men's desires versus women's desires. And he says he can keep it in check, but yeah, it's different for men, you know, when they're engaging with women than it is for women. Women don't have that innate desire to just go fuck someone the way a guy does. To which she more or less like laughs in his face and says like, "Oh, if you men only knew what women think," and then tells him a story about a time they were on vacation with their daughter. And while they were on vacation in the hotel, she saw a guy at the hotel and like it made her knees buckle. And she knew that if he approached her at any point on the vacation for like a tryst in his hotel room, that she would have accepted the offer and risked her marriage, risked losing her daughter, put everything in her life on the line in order to have one night potentially with this guy. And this news rocks Tom Cruise to his core. And then he gets called away on a meeting for one of his patients. One of his patients has passed away, and he has to go talk to the family. So then he leaves right after getting that news. The movie takes place over the span of a few days as he cycles more and more in his own head, imagining her with someone else. And this movie is a really excellent exploration of male fragility, masculinity, the way that men can so easily be challenged and have their standing in their relationships rocked to the core by something as simple as, you know, your partner telling you, I thought about this person, you know, that it shakes him so deeply is really a testament to, you know, how fragile most men's egos really are. And he spends the rest of the movie contemplating if he wants to react to this news by having his own affair. And he goes about trying to have an affair and meeting different women and ultimately going to this really insane party, which you kind of hear jokes made about, the Eyes Wide Shut party, but I won't really get too far into it. But the movie is a really deep, dark look into our psyches and into marriage. It is also relatively life-affirming. I think it's a pretty positive outlook on life, really. I know that sounds like a pretty dark description, but ultimately I think it's a pretty positive look on relationships and our lives, and it was certainly a brighter disposition than Kubrick usually had for his films. But it's a really brilliant film. I absolutely adore Eyes Wide Shut. Highly recommend it. One of my absolute favorite films of all time, and certainly one of my favorite Christmas movies. Really captures the spirit of the season. That's what we're going to start off with. Kubrick's masterpiece, Eyes Wide Shut. Okay, movie number 2. We're going to go into another drama. This one is also one of my top 3 favorite filmmakers, my top 3 filmmakers of all time. Stanley Kubrick, Ingmar Bergman, and John Carpenter. Carpenter never did a Christmas movie. I guess you could argue that The Thing is relatively Christmassy since it's entirely snowbound, but we're going to look at Ingmar Bergman's Christmas movie, Fanny and Alexander. Now, Fanny and Alexander, what a movie. It tackles so much. First of all, There are two versions of Fanny and Alexander. There is a version that was released in 1982 in theaters that's 3 hours long. And that was essentially Ingmar Bergman's swan song to filmmaking. It was his last movie that he made to be released in theaters, and the movie was a hit. It was one of his most successful films. It won Best Foreign Film, but not only that, it also won other awards at the Academy Awards. It won Best Production Design, it won Best Cinematography, and it won something else as well. And that's really remarkable for a foreign film to come in and sweep out awards from some of the American films. I know that we're fresh off of that happening with Parasite, but that really is a rarity for a foreign film to win much more than Best Foreign Film. Typically, they don't take away awards from American films. So when it does, you know that it's something special, and you know that the work that was put into the film is quite remarkable. And for Fanny and Alexander, it truly is quite remarkable. It is about a great big Swedish family, all told through the eyes of Alexander, a little boy who's essentially the proxy for Ingmar Bergman in his life. It's pulled from a lot of events that happened in his real life. And Fanny and Alexander are a little boy and a little girl, brother and sister, and it goes through this big family unit they have, sort of the destruction of the unit, their mother marrying someone else, and all the trials and tribulations that come with a big shift in your family dynamic and how you can kind of get back to that. There's also a lot of mysticism in the movie. There's totally unexplainable magic. A few things happen in the film that are very mysterious. It also, as all of Bergman's great work does, deals with faith, Christianity, and death. This one really takes a strong, hard look at death right in the face. And again, most of that doesn't sound very Christmassy, but I promise you, the first part of Fanny and Alexander is one of the most Christmassy things you'll see. It's very warm and fuzzy feeling. It's probably the most joyous piece of filmmaking that Bergman has done. So there's a second version of Fanny and Alexander, and that's the version that I'm recommending for the quadruple feature tonight. It's called the television cut. In 1984, he dropped the television cut for Swedish TV. And that is, bear with me, a 5.5 hour cut of the movie. I know, that's a very daunting thing, but what I'm recommending you do is watch the television cut. It's broken into 4 parts, and each one is like its own little movie. Fanny and Alexander, the television cut, part 1, is about 1.5 hours, and it functions like its own little Christmas film. And that section of the movie alone is one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time. It's exploring all the family dynamics of this huge Swedish family as they have a Christmas celebration. It is really beautiful. The first 1.5 hours of the movie is my favorite part of the film, even though the rest of the movie is brilliant as well. That's what I'm saying you should go check out. And then once you realize how great it is, eventually you'll get to parts 2, 3, and 4, which aren't really as Christmassy themed as the opening of the film, but the whole part 1 is kind of its own little complete story. So I highly recommend checking out the entirety of the Fanny and Alexander television cut if you can. If you can only find the theatrical cut, then just watch the 3-hour cut. It's really good as well. Yeah, that first 1.5 hours of part 1, truly one of the great Christmas films. The rest of the movie is absolutely brilliant as well. Again, one of my favorite movies of all time, not just Christmas movies. Back in 2018, Los Angeles was having this huge Ingmar Bergman retrospective. In fact, it was the biggest retrospective that LA had ever had for a filmmaker. And over the course of about 2 months, 5 different theaters across LA were showing, I think, 26 of Ingmar Bergman's films through the entire retrospective. I was lucky enough to be able to get to 21 of those screenings. The retrospective actually closed out with the 5.5 hour cut of Fanny and Alexander, and it happened just a few days away from my birthday. So it's actually quite difficult sometimes for me to convince Gina to watch, you know, a foreign film, especially a 5.5 hour foreign film, especially dragging her to a movie theater to go see that. But for my birthday that year, I just asked that she come see Fanny and Alexander with me, and not complain about the length of it or being bored or anything like that. And she went, and she was a trooper. And I think she actually wound up liking it a lot. At least she told me that. Maybe she was just being nice on my birthday, but she said she really, really enjoyed the whole experience. And I think that's true of a lot of, you know, more challenging films, difficult films. You know, a 5.5 hour Swedish film, oh my gosh, that one's going to be a chore to sit through. I think if you just start making the effort to exposing yourself to more cinema in that way, and, you know, not looking at your phone, seeing it in a theater if you can, not really an option in 2020, but, you know, trying to recreate that theatrical experience in your home, turn the lights off, put your phone down, really lose yourself in those films, I think you'll start to have greater appreciation of cinema as well. I mean, being a good cinema goer, being a good cinema watcher, watching the classics, watching the foreign films, the art house stuff, the obscure stuff, it takes a bit of a commitment, but I really think that movies are very important, and they really help shape us into better people. There's so many great lessons and so many great things that we can take from cinema, and there's certainly a lot that you can pull from Fanny and Alexander. So definitely check that one. Okay, we're going to slow things down a bit for movie number 3. We're going to get a little silly. The first 2 movies are a little heavy, so we're gonna get a little fun for our 3rd film. I love Christmas horror films. I mentioned that Black Christmas is one of my favorite horror films of all time. One that I love as well is Silent Night, Deadly Night. And there have been 5 Silent Night, Deadly Night films. Most of them aren't even really related to each other, but Silent Night, Deadly Night came out in the 80s to huge controversy because it's about a guy who is slowly going crazy, and he happens to be dressed as Santa doing this thing for his job when he loses his mind and then he goes on a killing spree. And the movie caused a lot of outrage when it came out, and it was protested because the idea of Santa murdering people was very vile to a lot of, you know, buttoned up conservative people. But regardless, the movie was relatively successful, and it spawned, well, a number of sequels. But our movie that we're going to watch for movie number 3 is actually Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2. This is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. This movie is such a troll move, troll level expert. The first time I saw Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, I was in high school, and I was watching it with one of my best friends, Ryan Wantajob. We were in his basement, and we had rented a stack of Christmas horror films to try to get into the Christmas horror spirit. And one of the movies we watched was, of course, Silent Night, Deadly Night. It was the first time I'd seen it, and I thought it was really enjoyable, and I thought it was a lot of fun. And then we popped on Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2. At the time, my first viewing, I hated it. The movie got me. It really tricked me. The trolling that happens in this film is because probably about 65% of the movie, maybe 75% of the movie, is flashbacks to Part 1. So if you watch Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, you're essentially getting the best parts from Part 1. Because Part 1, it can drag here and there, especially when you watch it year after year, at Christmas every year. It starts to get a little slow on repeated viewings. Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 flies because it's about the main character from Silent Night, Deadly Night, who is back, played by a completely different character, looks nothing like him, and he is having flashbacks through the whole film. And the way they do the flashbacks are so corny. He'll be having a flashback that lasts, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes, and then there's another little bit of the new movie, Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, for which they must have recorded like 30 minutes worth of footage. And then he'll go to, and then like the most outrageous one is he goes into a movie and he's watching a movie, and then the movie on the screen is Silent Night, Deadly Night. It's like he's watching a flashback, I guess. I don't know how they justify it artistically, but it is a total scam. That being said, if you haven't seen Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 is a perfect holiday viewing experience because you essentially get 2 movies rolled into one. Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 is one of those, you know, I hate to use the term so bad it's good movies, but it's It is. It's so bad, it's brilliant. And some of the lines that have come from Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 are iconic in the horror community. And probably the most famous line is garbage day. I don't know if you ever heard someone say, garbage day! But while he's on his killing spree, he walks by a dude taking out the trash from his house, and he just screams garbage day at him and shoots him dead and keeps going. That's about the level of creativity for most of the writing in the film. Nothing really ties into anything else. Nothing really matters. The writers just decided they wanted to kill some guy taking out the garbage to use the great line, garbage day, which isn't clever at all. But the movie has zero creativity. It's not clever at all. It's really fucking funny, and it's very entertaining. So it's one of my favorite Christmas horror films, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Part 2. We're going to wrap up with another sort of drama, sort of comedy, really beautiful film. We're going to watch Satoshi Kon's Tokyo Godfathers. Tokyo Godfathers is filled with magic and beauty and a lot of comedy and a lot of drama. It will probably bring some tears to your eyes, not because it's tragic, but just because it's a movie that is so full of heart. And if you're familiar with Satoshi Kon's other films like Millennium Actress or Paprika or Perfect Blue, his movies can be a little dark and sometimes a little trippy. This is probably his like lightest film, probably his most straight up enjoyable. It still has this bit of magical realism running through the movie, like all of his films kind of have this sort of magical quality. But Tokyo Godfathers is definitely the most life-affirming of his movies, the one that'll probably make you feel the best. So Tokyo Godfathers is about 3 homeless people in Tokyo, obviously. So one of them is like, former gambling addict who's lost his family, really fallen on hard times. One of them is a transgendered woman who really wants to have a baby, but she cannot conceive a child. And the other one is a teenage runaway. The 3 of them are rooting through the trash on Christmas night, and they find a baby that has been just thrown in the trash. And the rest of the film is the 3 of them trying to get the baby back to its parents or get the baby into safe hands. And it goes on quite the crazy adventure with all 3 of them. And sometimes they split up and get separated and go on separate adventures. But the whole movie ties together very beautifully. It's really creative. And I really highly recommend Tokyo Godfathers, especially for some Christmas viewing, some alternative Christmas films. This probably isn't at the top of your list for a Christmas film to reach for, but I really think you should check this one out. It'll probably, squish the bah humbug in you and won't probably make you feel good this holiday season, which maybe you need if you're not celebrating with family and you're feeling a little more depressed than usual around this holiday season. Check out Tokyo Godfathers. So those are the 4 films that we're going to be watching for alternative Christmas films. 4 of my favorite Christmas movies, 2 of my favorite movies of all time. We're going to start with Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, Eyes Wide Shut. Then we're going to go to part 1 of the television cut for Fanny and Alexander, Ingmar Bergman's masterpiece. He has like 10 masterpieces, but this is pretty high at the top of the stack. And then we're going to slum it a little bit for the absolutely balls-to-the-wall, entertaining, batshit, terrible, but also brilliant Silent Night, Deadly Night, Part 2. And we're going to wrap up with the beautiful hand-drawn animation, Tokyo Godfathers. The way they did the animation in this is really cool. So it's hand-drawn animation, but they draw all of the elements separately. So if there's a scene where like the camera pans from a building down to the ground, they draw the building separate, and they have a separate camera move for the panning down from the building. And then they draw like all of the trees that are in the foreground and layer them in separately, like a different element. And then they animate the camera move differently for that. So when the camera pans down, the trees, which are closer, move differently than the building, just like it would in an actual camera. So when you see a scene of like a whole city right? And there's a bunch of different buildings and trees and like birds flying by, and you can see them kind of like walking in the city. All of those elements are added in one at a time. So they're all drawn on their own sheets, and then they put them all together. That way it has all, like, you can't say photorealistic because it still looks like animation, but it has a very realistic quality to it that's sometimes jarring to watch, but incredibly beautiful. And it's not a style of animation that you see really too often anymore. Mainly Japanimation is the main way that you see sort of like classic hand-drawn animation still. And there's a few steadfasts of the genre that are still kind of making these classic hand-drawn beautiful films. Miyazaki is one, and then Satoshi Kon is another. They're doing two of the best kind of animated filmmakers that are working today. So those are the 4 films that we're going to be watching for alternative Christmas films. So thanks for tuning in. Happy holidays, whatever holiday you choose to partake in. I hope that you are not lonely in the holidays. I hope you have stuff to keep you occupied and distracted and happy. And I hope you have really good food. I hope you're taking care of yourselves. Thanks for watching. See you next week.